Sentinel of the stars, the crystalline spires of Lumaris gleamed under the light of 3 moons, casting prismatic shadows across the royal courtyard. Nolan Reed adjusted his regulation uniform and checked his pulse pistol for the 5th time that evening. 6 years as a human security specialist in the Lumarian Royal Guard had taught him that vigilance was the only currency that mattered on this alien world. Guard Reed. Position for needs coverage, came the voice of Commander Vexus through his earpiece. The ambassador from Terran Coalition is arriving soon.
Copy that,
Nolan replied, moving swiftly through the crowd of luminescent aliens whose skin tones ranged from soft lavender to deep indigo. Their height and ethereal grace made humans look stocky and graceless by comparison, as he took his position near the grand entrance. He caught sight of Princess Thalira. Unlike the other members of the royal family, whose expressions remained carefully neutral when addressing humans, the youngest princess often watched them with open curiosity. Tonight, her purple skin seemed to glow more intensely than usual, small bioluminescent patterns dancing across her temples and down her slender neck. The princess turned suddenly, her violet eyes meeting his. Nolan quickly looked away, focusing instead on scanning the perimeter. Contact between humans and the royal family was strictly professional, a boundary he had never considered crossing. The diplomatic ceremony proceeded as planned, with representatives from 12 star systems presenting gifts to the Lumarian sovereignty. Nolan remained alert, noting the positioning of each guest, cataloging potential threats. Something felt off, though he couldn't pinpoint what. His instincts proved correct when the light suddenly failed, plunging the grand hall into darkness. In the momentary confusion, Nolan heard the distinctive whine of a plasma weapon powering up. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward Princess Thalira, who stood exposed at the center of the platform. Down, he shouted, tackling her just as a plasma bolt seared the air where she had been standing. They tumbled behind an ornamental column as chaos erupted around them. "Stay behind me," Nolan ordered, forgetting protocol in the urgency of the moment. The princess, surprisingly, complied without argument. Raiders in dark combat gear swarmed the hall. Their target was clear: the royal family. Nolan fired precise shots, downing 2 attackers as he kept his body between them and the princess. When his weapon's charge depleted, he drew his backup blade. "When I move, run for the secure chamber," he told Thalira, gesturing toward the hidden doorway 20 paces away. "I will not abandon my people," she replied, her voice steady despite the danger. Tiny sparks of energy danced between her fingers, the bioluminescent manipulation that Lumarians were known for. Before Nolan could argue, 3 raiders converged on their position. He engaged the first with his blade, ducking under a wild swing and countering with a precise strike. The second raider fired, and Nolan felt searing pain across his ribs. Still, he maintained his defensive stance, landing a kick that sent the attacker sprawling. The third raider raised a disintegration pistol aimed at the princess. Without thought, Nolan threw himself into the path of the beam. The pain was immediate and overwhelming as the energy tore through his chest. He collapsed, dimly aware of Princess Thalira's scream and a burst of purple light emanating from her hands. When the royal guards finally subdued the last of the raiders, Thalira knelt beside Nolan's broken body. His breathing was shallow, blood soaking through his uniform. "Why would you do that?" she whispered, placing her hands over his wound. "You're just a human," Nolan tried to respond, but could only cough weakly. The princess began to channel her energy into him, her hands glowing with healing light. It was forbidden for royalty to use their essence on humans, but she seemed unconcerned with protocol. As her energy flowed into him, something unexpected happened. Where their skin connected, a pattern of interlocking geometric symbols began to form, first on Nolan's chest, then mirrored on Thalira's wrist. The light grew blindingly bright, causing gasps from the onlookers. "The soul mark," someone whispered in awe and horror. The princess pulled away, staring at the mark in disbelief. "Impossible," she breathed. Nolan looked down at the luminescent pattern now permanently etched into his skin, then up at the princess whose life he had saved. The connection between them hummed with an energy he couldn't understand, but somehow recognized deep within his soul, in saving her life. everything had changed. Forbidden connection. Olin awoke in an unfamiliar chamber. Sunlight filtering through crystalline windows that refracted light into rainbow patterns across the walls. His chest throbbed with dull pain, though when he examined the wound, he found only a silvery scar where the disintegration beam had struck. More prominently, the geometric pattern, the soul-marked, pulsed with a subtle violet glow that matched his breathing. "It's called the Volution," came a soft voice from the doorway. Princess Thalira stood there, her posture rigid despite the uncertainty in her eyes. "In your language, it might translate to Soulbridge." Nolan sat up slowly, acutely aware he was wearing only loose trousers, and that the princess's gaze was fixed on the mark on his chest. "What exactly happened, Your Highness?" "Something that hasn't occurred in 7 generations." Thalira approached, extending her wrist where the matching pattern shimmered. "The Volution only forms when 2 beings are compatible at their deepest essence." "Compatible?" Nolan repeated, the word heavy with implications. "Soul-paired. Destined." She sat on the edge of his bed, a breach of protocol that would have been unthinkable days earlier. "It was believed impossible between our species." The door burst open before Nolan could respond. 4 royal guards entered, followed by High Counselor Zaven, whose midnight blue skin had paled to an ashen color. "This is unconscionable," the counselor hissed, pointing a long finger at Nolan, human bearing the royal Volution. "The court is in chaos." Thalira rose, her small stature somehow commanding as she faced the much taller Lumerian. "The Volution cannot be denied or removed." "You know our laws, Counselor?" Laws which never anticipated such an aberration. Exaven's eyes narrowed. "This human should be eliminated before word spreads." "You would murder my soul-paired." The temperature in the room seemed to drop as Thalira's skin brightened with anger. "The penalty for such an act is exile." Nolan watched the exchange with growing unease. "I didn't ask for this, Mark," he said, rising to stand beside Thalira. "But I won't be threatened for saving the princess's life." "You've done more than save it," Zaven replied coldly. "Under Lumerian law, you are now irrevocably linked. The princess must either formally claim you as her mate or watch you perish as the Volution consumes your life force." Nolan's gaze snapped to Thalira. "Is that true?" She nodded slowly. "The bond requires completion within 1 lunar cycle, or it becomes destructive to the bearer with the weaker essence." "Which would be the human," Zaven added unnecessarily. Later that evening, Nolan paced the luxurious chamber where he'd been relocated. No longer a guard, but not quite a royal consort. His status remained ambiguous. The soul mark pulsed whenever Thalira was near, creating sensations he couldn't entirely comprehend. Echoes of emotions that weren't his own. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Thalira entered, having changed from her formal regalia into simpler attire that somehow made her seem younger, more vulnerable. "The High Council has been in session all day," she said, closing the door behind her. "They're divided on how to proceed." "And what do you want?" Nolan asked directly. Thalira approached him, her movements graceful, yet hesitant. "I never expected this. Humans were always just there. Background elements in my world, disposable," Nolan supplied, with a hint of bitterness. "Yes," she admitted, surprising him with her honesty. "But when you stepped in front of that weapon," she reached out, her fingers hovering just above his scar. "No one has ever valued my life above their own." The mark between them brightened at her proximity. Nolan felt a wave of her confusion, her fear, and something else, curiosity, perhaps even admiration. "I was doing my duty," he said. Though they both sensed the partial truth through their connection, the bond shows otherwise. Her fingers finally made contact with his skin, sending a jolt of warmth through the mark. It responds to truth, to genuine feeling. Nolan inhaled sharply at the contact. "So what happens now?" "Tomorrow at dawn, I must announce my decision." Her eyes met his, violet depths filled with conflict. "Claim you formally as my mate, or ... Let me die," he finished. Thalira's hand moved from his chest to cup his face. "I will not let that happen, Nolan Reed. Whatever comes, we face it together." The intimacy of the gesture, the use of his given name, these were boundaries crumbling between them. Through the mark, he felt her resolution forming, her decision crystallizing. There will be consequences, he warned. Yes, she agreed, stepping closer until the space between them nearly disappeared, the first of which is already happening. What's that? Her lips curved in a slight smile. I'm beginning to see you, truly see you. Not as a human guard, but as Nolan. Through their connection, he felt her genuine wonder at this realization. Something shifted in the air between them. The soul mark hummed with energy, as instinctively they moved closer. When their lips met, the connection between them flared, bathing the room in violet light. The kiss deepened, centuries of division between their species momentarily forgotten as the bonds sang between them. Outside, the smallest of Lumerus's 3 moons rose, beginning the countdown to a decision that would change two worlds forever. Whispers of rebellion then broke over the crystal city, bathing the spires in golden light. In the grand assembly hall, members of all 12 noble houses gathered, their murmurs filling the cavernous space with tension. Nolan stood at the base of the dais, dressed in formal attire that felt foreign against his skin after years in a guard's uniform. The soul mark on his chest pulsed in time with Thalera's heartbeat, a constant reminder of their inexplicable connection. From his position, he could see factions forming among the Lumerians, those who watched him with undisguised disgust, and others whose expressions held curiosity, even hope. Most troubling was a group centered around Lord Merrick, whose crimson-tinged purple skin marked him as a member of the northern provinces. Their whispered conversations stopped whenever royal guards passed near. "Attention," announced the court herald, striking the ceremonial chime. "Her Royal Highness, Princess Thalera of House Lumaris." The assembly fell silent as Thalera entered, her formal regalia glittering with embedded crystals that amplified her natural bioluminescence. She ascended the dais with measured steps, her eyes briefly meeting Nolan's before addressing the gathered nobles. "Esteemed members of the sovereignty," she began, her voice carrying clearly. "As you are aware, during the recent attack, an unprecedented event occurred." She extended her wrist, displaying the volution. "The ancient bond is formed between myself and Nolan Reed." His murmurs rippled through the assembly. History speak of the volution as the will of the stars, themselves a connection that transcends birth and status. Her voice strengthened. "Today I formally claim Nolan Reed as my bonded mate, as is my right under the laws of our ancestors." The hall erupted. Lord Merrick pushed forward, his face contorted with rage. "This is blasphemy," he shouted. "The royal bloodline contaminated by human weakness?" "Your mother would never, my mother, the sovereign queen," Thalera cut in, "respects the ancient laws." "The volution is spoken." High Counselor Zaven stepped forward. "The claim is recognized," he stated reluctantly. "Under protocol, the human Nolan Reed will undergo the rites of elevation and take his place in the royal household." The announcement sent another wave of reaction through the assembly. Nolan remained still, feeling the weight of countless alien eyes upon him. Through the bond, he sensed Thalera's relief, mingled with apprehension, not for herself, but for him. Hours later, after enduring the first of many ceremonial rites, Nolan found himself in the palace gardens with Thalera. The formal proceedings had left them little time to speak. "Privately, we've started a civil war," he said, quietly as they walked along a path lined with bioluminescent flowers that responded to their presence. "Ups." "It was already brewing," she replied. "The division between traditionalists and progressives has been widening for years. We've merely become its focal point." Nolan stopped beside a reflecting pool. "Lord Merrick and his followers, they're planning something. I recognized the signs from my security training." "Still think like a guard?" she observed, a small smile playing across her lips. "It's who I am," he said simply. "Mark or no mark." Thalera's expression softened. She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. "Then we use that. Your perspective sees things, mine cannot." Through their touch, the bond opened wider. Nolan caught glimpses of her memories, the isolation of royal life, the weight of expectation, her secret fascination with humans and their resilience. In return, he knew she was experiencing his past, the orphaned boy who joined Earth's military to find purpose. His assignment to Lumaris, as a diplomatic gesture, years of invisible service. There's more to this bond than they're telling us, he said, drawing her closer. I can feel it changing, growing stronger. The ancient texts speak of stages, Thalira admitted. As the bond matures, it allows for deeper connection, shared thoughts, even shared power. Their conversation halted as a royal messenger approached, bowing deeply. Your Highness, your presence is requested in the sovereign's private chamber. Thalira nodded her dismissal to the messenger before turning back to Nolan. Come with me. It's time you met my mother properly. The sovereign Queen Neria was a towering figure whose deep violet skin bore constellations of luminescent patterns denoting her royal lineage. She observed Nolan without warmth or hostility, merely calculation. So this is the human who bears my daughter's mark, she said finally. Approach. Nolan stepped forward, maintaining the respectful posture he'd been taught. The Queen extended her hand, placing it directly over his soul mark. A jolt of energy passed between them, making him gasp. Interesting, she murmured. The bond is genuine, not manufactured as some have suggested. She withdrew her hand. Do you know why the Volution has been absent from our people for 7 generations, daughter? The texts say the stars found none worthy, Thalira replied. Convenient explanation. Queen Neria moved to a hidden panel, retrieving an ancient crystal tablet. The truth is more troubling. The last recorded bond was between Princess Illyra and a being not of our world, a human diplomat. Their union sparked a conflict that nearly destroyed both our peoples. Nolan and Thalira exchanged shocked glances. The records were altered, the Queen continued. The truth buried to preserve peace. But now, history repeats itself. She fixed her gaze on Nolan. The question is whether you two will bring harmony or destruction. As they left the Queen's chambers, the weight of revelation heavy between them, Nolan caught sight of a shadow moving against protocol patterns in a restricted corridor. Wait, he whispered, pulling Thalira into an alcove. Something's wrong. Seconds later, Lord Merrick and High Counselor Zaven passed by, their hushed voices carrying in the crystalline hallway. Movement grows daily. The human-marked princess has given us the perfect catalyst, Merrick was saying. When the sovereign visits the Temple of Ancestors, we'll strike. And the princess? Asked Zaven, tragic casualty, along with her human pet. The old ways must be preserved. As their voices faded, Nolan turned to Thalira, whose eyes now glowed with fierce determination. It seems we've discovered their plot, she said, her fingers tightening around his. Now we prepare our response. Through the bond, they shared a moment of perfect understanding. Whatever came next, they would face it not as princess and guard, but as two beings united by a force older than either of their civilizations. Hearts across stars, the ancient Temple of Ancestors stood on the highest peak of Lumaris, its crystalline dome capturing and amplifying the light of all 3 moons. Nolan studied the structure's layout for the 5th time, committing every entrance and exit to memory. 3 days had passed since they'd overheard the conspiracy, and tonight Queen Neria would make her ceremonial visit, walking directly into Merrick's trap. The royal guard has been compromised, Nolan said, pointing to the security rotation displayed on the holographic map. These 4 positions have been reassigned to Merrick's people. Thalira nodded, her violet eyes reflecting the map's glow. We cannot alert my mother without knowing who else is involved. A wrong move would only accelerate their timeline. In the short time since their bonding, Nolan had watched Thalira transform from a sheltered royal to a strategic ally. The evolution between them had deepened, allowing glimpses of each other's thoughts without words and intimacy that still startled him. Then we become the trap within their trap, he suggested, indicating a maintenance passage that ran beneath the temple's main chamber. If we position ourselves here, we can intercept them before they reach the Queen. Thalira's hand found his, their marks brightening on contact. Just the 2 of us against Merrick's faction? The odds seem ... problematic. We have one advantage they don't, Nolan replied, squeezing her fingers. They don't understand what the Volution truly is. Hours later, disguised in the simple robes of temple attendants, they slipped through the ancient passageways beneath the sacred site. The air was thick with the scent of ceremonial oils and the faint electric temps of Lumerian energy fields. The texts I found in the restricted archive spoke of bonded pairs developing unique abilities. Thalira whispered as they paused at a junction. The Volution was once considered the greatest strength of our people, not an aberration. What changed? Nolan asked, checking the scanner he'd reprogrammed to track movement above them. Fear, she replied simply. Fear of diluting what made us Lumerian. After the conflict with humans generations ago, the noble houses began restricting contact, breeding only within approved bloodlines, until the Volution stopped appearing altogether. They engineered their own genetic isolation, Nolan realized. And now they can't understand why the bond is returned. With a human, no less, Thalira added with a smile that had grown increasingly familiar. The universe has an interesting sense of humor. Their conversation halted as the scanner pulsed with multiple readings. They're moving into position, Nolan whispered. The Queen's procession arrives in 10 minutes. They quickened their pace, reaching the hidden access panel that would bring them into the temple's inner sanctum. As Nolan prepared to open it, Thalira caught his arm. Whatever happens, she said, her voice low and intense, know that I would choose you even without the mark. The confession sent a surge of warmth through their bond. Nolan pulled her close, their foreheads touching in the dim light. I never thought I'd find belonging on this world, he murmured. You changed everything. Their lips met in a kiss that deepened as the Volution responded, illuminating the narrow passage with violet light. Through the connection, Nolan felt her desire, her fear, her determination, all mirroring his own emotions in perfect harmony. We should go, she whispered against his lips, though she made no move to pull away. One more moment, he replied, holding her tightly, just in case. When they finally separated, a new resolve had settled between them. Silently, Nolan activated the panel, and they emerged into the shadows of the great temple hall. The ambush unfolded exactly as they'd anticipated. As Queen Neria approached the sacred flame, armed figures moved from concealed positions. Marek stepped forward, his ceremonial robes hiding disruptor weapons. Now, Nolan signaled, and Thalira placed her hands on the crystalline floor. What happened next astonished even them. As Thalira channeled her energy, the Volution on Nolan's chest resonated in response. Instead of simply flowing through her as planned, the energy cycled between them, amplifying with each pass. The temple floor erupted with blinding light that paralyzed everyone in the chamber, everyone except the bonded pair and, inexplicably, Queen Neria herself. Impossible, gasped Marek, struggling against the energy field that held him immobile. How are you doing this? Thalira rose, her eyes glowing with power. The Volution was never about preserving bloodlines, she announced, her voice carrying throughout the temple. It was about evolution, about bringing new strengths to our people. Loyal guards rushed in, securing the conspirators as the energy field dissipated. Queen Neria approached her daughter, an unreadable expression on her regal face. You knew, Thalira said. Not a question, but a realization. You knew what would happen when I bonded with Nolan. I suspected, the Queen admitted. The ancient texts speak of great power when disparate energies unite in harmony. It is why I did not forbid the claiming, despite the Council's protests. Nolan stepped forward. This was a test. For both of you, Queen Neria confirmed, and for our people. Lumeris has stagnated in isolation for too long. Perhaps it is time for change. In the aftermath of the failed coup, Nolan and Thalira retreated to the coastal province where the first human settlers had once been welcomed centuries earlier. Away from the court's scrutiny, they explored their deepening bond and the histories that had been hidden from both their peoples. They stood on the cliffs, overlooking the luminescent sea, the wind carrying salt and the sweet scent of night-blooming flowers. Thalira's head rested against Nolan's shoulder, their marks pulsing gently in synchronized rhythm. The original human settlement was here, she said, pointing to ruins barely visible in the moonlight. Before the conflicts began, our people lived alongside humans, learning from each other. And falling in love, Nolan added, his arms tightening around her waist. Through their connection, he sent her the depth of his feelings, no longer confusing or frightening. But a certainty as solid as the ground beneath them, Thalira turned in his embrace, her purple skin shimmering with patterns that had grown more intricate since their bonding. I never understood human emotions before you, she confessed. They seemed so chaotic, so overwhelming, and now, he asked, tracing the luminescent patterns along her neck. Now I understand chaos can be beautiful. She guided his hand to the Volusin on her wrist, then placed her palm over his mark. Complete, as their marks touched, the connection between them opened fully. Memories, hopes, fears flowed freely, the boundaries between their separate selves momentarily dissolved. In that space of perfect unity, Nolan saw the future stretching before them, challenges certainly, but also the possibility of healing wounds centuries in the making. When they returned from their communion, they found themselves lying on the soft grass, entwined in each other's arms. The 3 moons of Lumaris shone overhead, witnesses to a bond that transcended the divisions of their worlds. We return to the capital tomorrow, Thalira murmured against his chest. The real work begins, changing an empire's worth of prejudice. Nolan smiled. Should be simple after stopping an assassination. Her laughter vibrated through their connection, a sensation he'd grown to crave. Simple, no. Worthwhile, yes. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. Besides, we've already accomplished the impossible. Finding each other? He asked. Loving each other, she corrected, pulling him down for a kiss that promised many more to come. A new dawn, the great hall of reconciliation hummed with tense energy as representatives from both human settlements and Lumerian provinces gathered for the first joint assembly in over 200 years. 6 months had passed since the failed coup, and though Merrick and his closest allies had been exiled to the outer moons, resistance to change remained entrenched on both sides. Nolan stood beside Thalira at the central dais, their formal attire a deliberate blend of human and Lumerian design. The Volusian marks on their skin glowed visibly through the fabric, no longer hidden, but displayed as a symbol of their vision. They're still segregating themselves, Nolan observed quietly, noting how humans clustered on one side of the hall, Lumerians on the other. Old habits. Change comes slowly, Thalira replied, though he felt her disappointment through their bond. But it does come. Queen Neria ascended the dais, her regal presence commanding immediate silence. People of 2 worlds, she began. We gather today to address the divisions that have weakened us both. For generations, we have lived as separate societies on one planet, a division born not of wisdom, but of fear. Murmurs rippled through the assembly as screens around the hall illuminated with historical images. Records restored from the hidden archives showing humans and Lumerians working together, celebrating together, living as neighbors rather than master and servant. Our ancestors knew what we have forgotten, the Queen continued. Strength lies in diversity, not isolation. Today, we begin the process of remembering this truth. She gestured to Nolan and Thalira. The Volusian has returned to our people. After 7 generations, not within our carefully maintained bloodlines, but in a bond between worlds. This is no accident, but a reminder of our shared destiny. As the Queen spoke, Nolan noticed Counselor Zaven and several prominent human leaders exchanging skeptical glances. Though Zaven had been cleared of direct involvement in the coup, his traditionalist views remained unchanged. Pretty words, the counselor said, when the Queen had finished, rising to address the assembly. But reality is less accommodating than rhetoric. Humans and Lumerians are fundamentally different beings. Our physiologies, our lifespans, our abilities create natural boundaries that cannot be wished away. Different, yes, came a new voice. Ateric Chen, representative of the largest human settlement, stood, but difference need not mean division. Before coming here today, I reviewed our settlement's medical records. Cases of genetic deterioration have increased 30% in the past generation, a direct result of our limited population. The noble houses face similar challenges, added Lady Celine, whose pale blue skin marked her as from the coastal provinces. Our gifts grow weaker with each generation of carefully controlled breeding. Thalira stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. "The evolution was once common among our ancestors, not just between Lumerians, but between our people and others, including humans. These bonds strengthened both species, allowing an exchange of traits and abilities that benefited all." Theoretical history, Zaven dismissed. Even if true, how would such bonds address modern concerns? The princess and her human guard are an anomaly. Are they? What? Queen Neria gestured to the back of the hall, where doors opened to admit a group of 20 couples, each pair consisting of one human and one Lumerian, all bearing the faint beginning patterns of the evolution. Gasps and exclamations filled the chamber. Nolan stared in amazement at the couples, feeling Thalera's surprise mirroring his own through their connection. Since the bonding of Princess Thalera and Nolan Reed became public knowledge, these pairs have come forward, the Queen explained. Some served in the same households for years. Others met recently during reconstruction efforts. Ought to report the early stages of bond formations, something that would have been hidden or suppressed before. The evolution was never extinct, Thalera realized aloud. It was merely waiting for us to be ready again. The assembly erupted in overlapping conversations. Nolan felt a swell of hope through his bond with Thalera, tempered by the knowledge that opposition would not dissolve overnight. Zaven and his supporters huddled in urgent discussion, while curious humans and Lumerians cautiously approached the newly revealed bonded pairs. As the formal proceedings gave way to smaller discussions, Nolan and Thalera found themselves surrounded by the new pairs, each eager to share their experiences and ask questions about the developing bond. "We never thought it possible," said a human engineer named Maya, her hand clasped tightly with her Lumerian partner. "When the marks first appeared, we kept them hidden, afraid of the consequences." "No more hiding," Thalera assured them. "Your bonds represent the future of both our peoples." Later, as the assembly continued into the evening, Nolan and Thalera slipped away to the palace gardens, their refuge throughout the tumultuous months of political negotiation and personal discovery. "I felt it today," Nolan said as they walked beneath trees that glowed with natural bioluminescence. "When all those couples entered a resonance through our bond, did you feel it too?" Thalera nodded, her expression thoughtful. The ancient texts mentioned this: a network of connection formed when multiple bonds exist simultaneously. They called it the Velanetta shared consciousness that strengthens all who participate. "That sounds either wonderful or terrifying," Nolan laughed softly. "Perhaps a bit of both," she agreed, stopping beside the reflecting pool that had become their favorite spot. Like most profound changes, the 3 moons of Lumaris shimmered on the water's surface, their light catching the crystalline structures that dotted the garden. Nolan pulled Thalera close, their marks brightening at the contactor, response that had become as natural as breathing. "I have something to show you," she said, placing his hand over her abdomen. Through their bond, he felt it immediately, a tiny spark of energy, distinct from Thalera's signature, but connected to them both. How he began, then stopped, as understanding dawned. "The evolution," the healers confirmed it this morning, she said, joy radiating through their connection. "Our child will be the first of a new generation, neither fully human nor fully Lumerian, but something beautifully in between, overwhelmed." Nolan knelt before her, pressing his forehead against the place where their child grew. The evolution pulsed with a rhythm that now included this new, precious life. "The council will have opinions," he said wryly, looking up at her. "Ah, the council always has opinions," she replied, her fingers threading through his hair. "But they no longer dictate our future or the future of our people." In the reflecting pool beside them, the image of the 3 moons aligned in a configuration that occurred only once every century, a cosmic convergence that the ancient Lumerians had called the harmony of worlds. Neither noticed the rare astronomical event, too absorbed in the miracle of their own creation. As they returned to the great hall, where humans and Lumerians had begun to cautiously intermingle, Nolan and Thalera moved as one being with 2 hearts, living proof that the greatest distances could be bridged by understanding and love. The Empire was changing, step by careful step. Old prejudices would not vanish overnight, and challenges certainly lay ahead. But as the couple took their place before their people, their joined hands raised in a gesture of unity, the evolution between them shone with a promise that transcended the stars themselves. A new dawn was rising on Lumaras, and not just for two individuals bound by an ancient mark, but for two peoples finally remembering that their greatest strength had always been each other.